Oakwood Heights was the kind of neighborhood that looked like it had been plucked straight from a postcard. The streets were tree-lined, the lawns meticulously manicured, and every house seemed to have its own story to tell. The neighborhood was full of families. Young parents pushing strollers, elderly couples sitting on their porches watching the sunset, and teenagers skateboarding on sidewalks. It was a peaceful, suburban paradise, or so it appeared. In the heart of it all was James Holloway, the charismatic president of the Homeowners Association, HOA. With his perfectly tailored suit, a smile that could light up a room, and an almost magnetic charm, James had become the embodiment of Oakwood Heights' spirit. Everyone loved him. He'd been in charge of the HOA for years, and under his leadership, the neighborhood had flourished. New streetlights, a community pool, and well-maintained parks were just a few of the things residents credited him for. His every word seemed to carry weight, and his presence was like a calming balm for the neighborhood's concerns. But over time, whispers began to spread. Quiet, subtle murmurs that could be heard over fences, during neighborhood barbecues, and in the aisles of the local grocery store. At first, they were easily dismissed. People noticed the rising HOA dues and the lack of substantial improvements, but the issue was small enough that it didn't feel like a threat. Everyone was too polite, too respectful, to speak out too loudly. "It's probably just inflation," they'd say. "James is doing his best." Yet, in the back of their minds, something didn't sit right. Then came the streetlight debacle. One by one, the new streetlights, promised by the HOA, began to flicker, buzz, and in some cases, simply refuse to turn on. At night, the once welcoming glow that illuminated Oakwood Heights began to fade into darkness. Residents, confused but trusting, tried to shrug it off. Surely it was just a temporary issue. But weeks turned into months, and the streetlights remained dark. Residents would find themselves walking home after dusk, stumbling in the shadows as if the neighborhood had abandoned them. Still, James assured them that everything was under control. "The contractors are working on it," he would say with a reassuring pat on the back. As the streetlights dimmed, so did the sense of safety that Oakwood Heights had always enjoyed. The first real signs of change, of something gone wrong, began to materialize when the promised renovations to the neighborhood park were delayed indefinitely. What was once supposed to be a vibrant, family-friendly space became a barren field of overgrown grass and rusting playground equipment. The swing sets squeaked in the wind, but no children played there anymore. And the HOA dues continued to rise. Each letter from James and the board came with an increase, accompanied by vague explanations about necessary improvements and community upgrades. But the promises seemed hollow. The grass was no greener, the park no closer to being fixed, and the neighborhood, once buzzing with a sense of pride, began to fall into a quiet frustration. It wasn't until Sarah, a sharp-eyed software engineer, began to connect the dots that things started to unravel. She had always been a bit of a skeptic when it came to James's charm, but like most of the neighbors, she hadn't questioned his authority. After all, he had built a reputation on being the neighbor everyone could trust. But one evening, as she was going over the latest HOA financials online, just out of curiosity, she noticed something strange. There was a significant sum of money that seemed to disappear from the accounts each quarter, with no clear explanation. The numbers were small at first, almost too small to be noticed, but Sarah's trained eye didn't miss them. The more she dug, the clearer it became. A pattern emerged, an unsettling, deliberate pattern of funds disappearing into what looked like a private account, one that, as far as Sarah could tell, wasn't tied to any legitimate HOA expenses. The funds were steadily being siphoned off, month after month, and every time, James Holloway's name was right at the center of it. She couldn't believe it at first. It seemed impossible. James, the smiling, ever-helpful president of the HOA, the man who had been the face of every neighborhood event, the one who had made sure the flowers were planted and the pool was clean. But the numbers didn't lie. A chill ran down her spine as the weight of the discovery settled in. Her mind raced. How long had this been going on? How much money had disappeared? And more importantly, where had it gone? This was no small mistake, no accidental accounting error. No, this was something far more sinister. James Holloway, it seemed, wasn't just the friendly face of Oakwood Heights. He was the thief hiding in plain sight. Suspense visuals. Sarah, hunched over her laptop, eyes wide as she scrolls through pages of financial documents, her fingers trembling. The numbers blur together on the screen, but one thing is clear: the amount of money siphoned is growing. As the discovery sinks in, the camera pulls back, showing Sarah sitting in the dimly lit room, the shadows closing in on her as the enormity of what she's uncovered begins to take hold. In that moment, Oakwood Heights, for all its pristine lawns and sunlit porches, became something else entirely, a place where trust had been shattered. And the calm before the storm was about to give way to a reckoning. Cliffhanger. Sarah stands up determined. Her hand hovers over the phone as she contemplates her next move. Her breath quickens, the weight of the decision looming. This wasn't just about a few missing dollars anymore. This was about saving the heart of her community from a man who had slowly, quietly betrayed them all. What would she do next? The evening air in Oakwood Heights had a cool, uneasy stillness to it. The gentle rustle of tree leaves in the distance did little to mask the tension that had begun to simmer just below the surface. The neighborhood, which had once felt like a warm, welcoming community, now seemed shrouded in an uncomfortable silence. The residents weren't sure what had changed, but they felt it. Something was off, and for the first time in years, Sarah didn't feel entirely safe walking down the street she had called home for so long. It was at the neighborhood's monthly book club meeting when the first ripple of rebellion surfaced. Normally, these gatherings were filled with light conversation, discussions about the latest thriller or drama novel, and recipes swapped between sips of wine. But tonight, the room was different. Whispers had begun to circulate, and people were growing restless. The streetlights had been flickering for weeks. The park remained a ghost town of overgrown grass and neglected equipment. No matter how much James Holloway reassured them, the evidence of neglect was hard to ignore. The promises he'd made seemed to be evaporating like mist in the early morning sun. That's when Sarah finally spoke up. She wasn't one to stir the pot. In fact, she had always been quiet at these meetings, content to listen rather than lead. But tonight was different. As she sat at the head of the table, her fingers drumming nervously on her wine glass, she knew the moment had arrived. She couldn't sit idly by anymore. She stood, her voice steady but filled with determination. "I've been looking into the HOA finances," Sarah began, her gaze sweeping over the group of neighbors. Their reactions were mixed, a few raised eyebrows, others exchanging curious glances. I found some discrepancies. Large sums of money have been disappearing. No clear explanation as to where it's going. I think it's time we start asking some serious questions. A collective gasp spread through the room. A few murmurs rippled around the table, but most people fell silent, stunned by Sarah's words. The quiet hum of tension that had been simmering in the neighborhood for weeks now reached a boiling point. "Are you saying James has been stealing from us?" Mark, a local accountant who had joined the group late, asked incredulously. His brow furrowed as he leaned forward, his voice low but urgent. "But James is the one who organized all of this. He's been our leader for years. Are you sure?" Sarah nodded, her face pale but resolute. "I've gone through the records. It's all there. Thousands of dollars unaccounted for, funneled into a private account. The last few months, the amounts have been growing. We've all been paying higher dues for improvements that never came." The room fell silent once again. The realization hung in the air like a heavy fog, suffocating the usual chatter and replacing it with disbelief. Mark took a deep breath, his accountant's mind already at work. "We need proof before we do anything. If this is true, it could destroy the entire community. It's not just about money. It's about trust." The tension was thick, but the sense of urgency was undeniable. A few of the older residents exchanged worried glances. They had lived through hard times, but this kind of betrayal was something none of them had anticipated. A few younger parents seemed less surprised, their eyes narrowing as they muttered about the last few months' growing unease. The grass wasn't greener, and the once pristine streets seemed to be losing their shine. And then, like a dam breaking, the floodgates opened. One by one, the neighbors began sharing their frustrations. The constantly delayed park renovation, the broken streetlights, the damaged fence along the neighborhood boundary that had been in the works for months. They started to realize that all these small issues, the things they'd once overlooked, were connected. It wasn't just bad management or unfortunate timing. It was a deliberate pattern, a slow erosion of the community they had once trusted so blindly. Sarah's heart raced as she listened to the others speak. She had expected some resistance, but this level of agreement was almost unsettling. She wasn't alone. This wasn't just her suspicion anymore. This was a shared understanding. This was bigger than one person. This was about the neighborhood, the place they all called home. "We can't just let this slide," Mark said, his voice now firm and authoritative. "But we have to be smart about it. If we confront James without solid proof, he'll just spin it, make us look paranoid. We need to build a case." The conversation shifted into planning mode. Sarah and Mark would gather the evidence they needed, discreetly and without alerting James. The last thing they wanted was for him to catch wind of their investigation before they were ready to confront him. A few neighbors offered to help, volunteering their skills, from tech expertise to research capabilities. The entire room seemed to shift gears, morphing from a group of disillusioned residents into a team of determined investigators, ready to uncover the truth no matter what it took. As Sarah left the meeting that night, she couldn't shake the feeling that things were about to spiral. The momentum had shifted. The people who had once adored James now saw him as a possible villain. She couldn't ignore the growing sense of dread gnawing at her stomach. The path ahead wasn't just uncertain, it was dangerous. Suspense visuals. The camera follows Sarah as she walks down the quiet street, her footsteps echoing in the silence of the night. The flickering streetlights cast long shadows across the sidewalk, and the neighborhood, once full of life, now feels like a haunting backdrop. A shot of her tense face, her eyes scanning the empty streets, before she glances back over her shoulder, half expecting to see James lurking in the darkness. The camera lingers on the darkening sky, as if foreshadowing the storm that's about to hit Oakwood Heights. Cliffhanger. As Sarah reaches her front door, she hears the unmistakable sound of a car slowing down. She turns sharply, her pulse racing, the darkness swallowing up the street around her. It's James's car, pulled up across the street, engine running. Was he watching her? Had he known all along? The tension crackles in the air as she stands frozen in place. Sarah's heart raced as she stood frozen in the doorway, staring at James's car parked across the street. The engine purred quietly, the headlights cutting through the darkness like two predatory eyes. She could feel the cold sweat beating at the back of her neck. Had he seen her leaving the meeting? Was he aware that she had started digging into the HOA finances? The thought sent a chill through her. But as she stood there, in the shadow of her front porch, something in her gut told her he wasn't watching her. At least, not right now. She held her breath, her eyes flicking between the car and the empty street. The night felt unnaturally still, the usual sounds of crickets and distant traffic replaced by an ominous quiet. She waited for what felt like an eternity before the car slowly rolled away into the night. Her pulse gradually slowed, but the unease lingered. Was it just coincidence, or had James noticed something was off? Either way, Sarah couldn't afford to second-guess herself. The stakes were too high now. She had to push forward. The neighborhood had been betrayed, and the truth had to come out, no matter the cost. The next morning, Sarah met Mark at the local coffee shop, a small, quiet place nestled in the corner of the neighborhood shopping plaza. The warm, welcoming aroma of freshly brewed coffee was a stark contrast to the cold weight of the secrets they were about to uncover. As Sarah slid into the booth across from Mark, he wasted no time. "Did you see James last night?" he asked, his voice low, as if even mentioning his name might make him appear. "I don't know," Sarah replied, her voice tight. "His car was parked across the street when I left. Engine running. It felt like he was watching me." Mark leaned back, his eyes narrowing. "I told you he's not just some friendly guy. We got to be careful. If he suspects anything, we could be in real trouble." They both fell silent for a moment, the weight of their mission hanging heavily in the air. They had spent the last few days going through the HOA's financial records, cross-referencing bank statements with receipts and maintenance logs. The deeper they dug, the more disturbing the findings became. The sums were staggering. Hundreds of thousands of dollars missing, funneled into a private account under a pseudonym that led nowhere. The worst part, it wasn't just money for neglected repairs or canceled improvements. It was money for everything. For things that James had promised to the neighborhood but had never followed through on. James had made sure to cover his tracks, creating false reports and approving fake invoices that all led back to the same account. "We need to get access to his personal accounts," Sarah said, her voice quiet but filled with determination. "We've got all the evidence we need, but we can't make a move without that final piece." Mark hesitated, looking around to make sure no one was listening. "I don't know, Sarah. That's crossing a line. We're already walking a fine line by doing this. What if he catches us? What if we're wrong?" But Sarah's eyes were focused, unwavering. "Mark, we know it's him. We've seen the pattern. If we don't expose him now, how many more people will he deceive? This isn't just about money. It's about the entire neighborhood. We can't let him get away with it." Mark leaned forward, his voice low and urgent. "Okay, we'll do it. But we need to be smart. No mistakes." They spent the next few days quietly gathering everything they needed, carefully covering their tracks. They had to make sure they didn't alert James to their investigation. They enlisted the help of a tech-savvy neighbor, Emily, who had connections to a few reliable hackers. Emily had been a quiet ally ever since Sarah had shared her suspicions, and now it was time to move forward. But even as they prepared for their next move, an unsettling thought gnawed at Sarah. She couldn't shake the image of James's car in front of her house the night before. Had he known all along? Had he been watching, waiting for them to make a mistake? Suspense visuals. The scene shifts to Sarah and Mark poring over documents, their faces illuminated only by the harsh glow of the laptop screens in the dimly lit room. The camera focuses on their hands as they scroll through bank records, each new line of data revealing more of the web James had spun. A shot of the bank statement, the missing funds highlighted in bright red, followed by an eerie zoom-in on James's signature next to a suspiciously large transfer. Tension mounts. Outside, the streets of Oakwood Heights are calm and picturesque in the daylight. Children playing, neighbors walking dogs. But inside, the atmosphere is thick with tension. A slow pan across the neighborhood shows James's house in the distance, a quiet fortress that seems to stand apart from the growing unrest around it. As Sarah closed the laptop, a single thought lingered in her mind. We're getting too close to the truth. If James knows what we're doing, everything could fall apart. She knew they couldn't stop now. They were too deep in the game, too close to exposing the man who had deceived them all. But with every step they took, the stakes grew higher. The risk of being caught was real, and the consequences would be far worse than just losing their neighborhood's trust. Cliffhanger. That afternoon, Sarah received an unexpected phone call. The number was unlisted, but the voice on the other end was unmistakable. "James." "Sarah," he said, his tone calm, almost too calm. "I think we need to have a little chat. I know what you've been up to." Her blood ran cold. It was no longer just a feeling. He was on to them. Sarah's breath caught in her throat as James's voice echoed through the phone. It was calm, calculated, like the voice of someone who already knew the game had changed, and now it was time to end it. "I know what you've been up to," James repeated, his voice smooth, almost conversational. "You think I didn't notice the way you've been poking around? The quiet meetings, the whispers, the strange transactions in the HOA accounts. I'm not blind, Sarah. I've been watching." Her heart raced as her thoughts scrambled to process his words. How long had he known? Had he seen them at the coffee shop the other day? Was he waiting for the right moment to strike? "James," Sarah said, her voice firm but betraying a hint of tension, "I don't know what you're talking about. This has nothing to do with—" "Oh, but it does," he interrupted smoothly, his voice cutting through her words like a knife. "You've been digging around in places you shouldn't. I think it's time we had a little chat about your concerns." Her stomach twisted into a knot. The last few days had been a whirlwind of discovery, and now she felt the full weight of the situation pressing down on her. She hadn't expected this. She hadn't expected James to be this aware, this quick to act. He was playing a different game now, and she was suddenly afraid that she had underestimated him. "Where?" she forced herself to ask, keeping her voice steady, though inside, she was a mess of nerves and adrenaline. "I'll be over in an hour. Don't bother trying to call anyone else," he added with a dangerous calm. "I'll be watching." Before she could respond, the line went dead, leaving a quiet static hum in the receiver. Sarah stared at the phone, her mind spinning. James knew. He had known for a while. And now he was making his move. There was no doubt in her mind that he was coming to confront her, and to silence her for good. The next hour felt like an eternity. She paced the living room, her mind racing with possibilities. What had James seen? How much had he figured out? Was this just a bluff? Or was he genuinely closing in on her and Mark? Mark had been her first call after the conversation ended. He was just as rattled, but he hadn't hesitated. "We have to be ready for him," Mark said urgently over the phone. "This is bigger than us now. We can't let him intimidate us. We need to stand our ground. If he's coming to talk, then we need to make sure he knows we're not backing down." As Sarah hung up, she gathered her notes, the evidence they had collected, and placed them carefully in a drawer. If things went sideways, she needed to be ready. Her mind flashed to Emily, the tech-savvy neighbor who had been helping them. Emily was supposed to be their backup if things got ugly, but Sarah wasn't sure she could rely on anyone now. James was no fool. He was probably already several steps ahead. Outside, Oakwood Heights appeared peaceful, the sun casting a golden glow over the tree-lined streets. Birds chirped happily from the branches, and the sounds of children playing in the distance created an idyllic scene that couldn't have been further from the storm brewing just below the surface. Sarah's eyes flicked to the window. There, parked a few houses down, was a car she didn't recognize, a dark sedan, sleek and polished. It was angled in a way that made it hard to see from the street, but she knew that car was there for a reason. She could feel it in her bones. James was already here. She pulled the blinds down quickly, her heart pounding in her chest. She had been so careful to cover her tracks, so careful to stay under the radar. How had he found out? And why now? Suspense visuals. The camera zooms in on Sarah's anxious face, her eyes darting from the window to the door as the air around her thickens with tension. The camera cuts to the dark sedan parked in the distance, its tinted windows reflecting the fading light of the evening. A low, ominous hum fills the background as the viewer feels the weight of impending danger. The camera lingers on Sarah's hands, tightly gripping the edge of the table, as if bracing for the confrontation that's about to unfold. Tension building. The sound of footsteps echoes in the distance. The world outside seems to fade into a blur as Sarah's focus narrows on the door. Every noise, every creak of the house feels amplified, as if the house itself is holding its breath. A shot of her reaching for her phone, her fingers trembling as she tries to call Emily, but the line goes dead. The camera zooms in on her face, eyes wide, lips pressed in a tight line, as she hears the unmistakable sound of a knock at the door. James. He had arrived. Cliffhanger. Sarah takes one last deep breath, the blood rushing in her ears. She knows there's no turning back. This is it. The moment she's been dreading. The moment the whole neighborhood's secrets might come crashing down. Her hand slowly reaches for the door handle, her body tense with anticipation. When she opens it, what will she face? Will it be James's charm, his smooth, manipulative smile, or something darker? And then, the doorbell rings again. Louder this time. The sound slices through the air like a warning, signaling the beginning of a confrontation that will change Oakwood Heights forever. The doorbell rang again, a sharp, insistent chime that echoed through the house like a warning. Sarah's heart thudded against her chest as she stared at the door, her mind racing. This was it. James had arrived, and she couldn't afford to hesitate. With every second that passed, the walls seemed to close in tighter, the weight of the truth growing heavier. Taking a deep breath, Sarah wiped her sweaty palms on her jeans and steeled herself. She had no choice now but to face him, whatever he had planned, whatever threats he might throw at her. She had to stand her ground. She reached for the door handle, the cold metal sending a chill through her fingertips. Her hand shook slightly, but she forced herself to steady it. The door creaked open, revealing James standing in the doorway, his expression unreadable, his posture poised like a predator. His dark eyes scanned her face, a faint smirk tugging at the corners of his lips. "Sarah," he said smoothly, his voice low and deliberate. "I think it's time we had a little conversation, don't you?" For a moment, neither of them spoke. The tension between them crackled in the air like static, both of them sizing each other up, trying to gauge the other's next move. Sarah knew she had to stay calm. She couldn't let him see how much he rattled her. "Come in," she said, her voice steady, but colder than she intended. James didn't hesitate, stepping into the house without invitation, his gaze flicking around the foyer as if he were inspecting the place. He moved with the confidence of someone who had already won, who had all the power in the room. "Nice place," he remarked, his eyes lingering on the framed photos on the walls, the cozy furniture. "Too bad it's about to get a little less pleasant." Sarah clenched her fists at her sides, resisting the urge to lash out. She knew that James thrived on intimidation, using his charm and confidence to manipulate people. But this time, it wasn't going to work on her. She had the truth on her side, and she wasn't going to back down now. "I don't know what you think you know, James," Sarah said, her voice calm but sharp. "But I'm not going to let you get away with this. We've seen the accounts. We know about the money you've been siphoning off." James chuckled softly, as if the idea of being caught was laughable. "You think you figured it all out, don't you? But you're missing something, Sarah. I've been watching you. I knew you'd catch on eventually. You're not the first person to try and take me down. But I'm always one step ahead." Sarah's blood ran cold. He wasn't surprised. In fact, he seemed pleased by the discovery. She could feel the tension between them shifting, the game becoming even more dangerous than she had anticipated. This wasn't just about money anymore. This was a battle for control, a fight to see who would bend first. "Then why don't you tell me everything, James?" Sarah asked, her voice colder now. "Why don't you explain why you've been stealing from your own neighbors?" James's smirk widened, but there was no humor in it, only something darker, something menacing. "You think I've been stealing? Oh, Sarah, you have no idea how much bigger this is than you realize." He stepped closer, his voice dropping to a whisper, as if sharing a secret no one else could hear. "I've been preparing this neighborhood for something bigger, something better. You see, Sarah, while you were busy digging through my finances, I've been investing in Oakwood Heights. I've been building something that will change everything. A new future, one where I'm in charge, where everyone listens to me." His words sent a chill down Sarah's spine. She had no idea what he was talking about, but she knew instinctively that it was dangerous. He wasn't just after money. He was after control, total, absolute control over the entire neighborhood. She took a step back, her eyes narrowing. "What are you talking about?" James's smile only deepened, a flash of something dark behind his eyes. "You'll see soon enough, Sarah. I've set things in motion. The wheels are already turning. You think this is just about a few stolen funds? No, it's about power. The kind of power you can't even begin to comprehend. And I'm not going to let you, or anyone else, stand in my way." Suddenly, the front door slammed open behind them, and Sarah's pulse spiked. Emily, the tech-savvy neighbor who had been helping them gather evidence, stood there, eyes wide, breathless. "Sarah, I hacked into his personal account. There's a whole network. He's been funneling money to some kind of investment scheme. He's been using the neighborhood as a front." James whirled around, his eyes flashing with anger, but it was too late. Emily had already gathered the proof they needed. The whole scheme was laid bare before them, and James's carefully constructed empire was crumbling before his eyes. "Everything you've been building is about to fall apart," Sarah said, her voice steady, now filled with resolve. "We've got you, James. It's over." Suspense visuals. The camera shifts to Emily, standing in the doorway, her laptop held up in front of her like a shield. The camera slowly zooms in on the screen, revealing a detailed network of bank accounts and transactions, each one connecting to a larger, more sinister web of corruption. The tension crackles in the room as Sarah and James face off, their stares locked in an intense battle of wills. The camera pans around them, capturing the subtle shifts in body language, the way Sarah stands tall and confident now, while James seems to grow more erratic, more desperate with each passing second. Cliffhanger. James steps back, his face twisted with rage. But then, to everyone's surprise, he smiles. It's a cold, terrifying smile. "You think you've won," he says softly. "You haven't seen anything yet. The real game is just beginning." And with that, he turns and walks out, leaving Sarah and Emily standing in the doorway, the weight of his words hanging in the air like a storm cloud ready to burst. The door slams shut behind him, and the neighborhood's fate feels more uncertain than ever. The slam of the door echoed through the house like the final drumbeat of a war march. Sarah stood frozen, staring at the empty threshold, her mind a whirlpool of questions and dread. James's last words, cold and menacing, rang in her ears. The real game is just beginning. She couldn't shake the image of his twisted smile, his eyes gleaming with something far darker than mere arrogance. Emily, standing beside her, was visibly shaken, but her eyes were burning with the fire of resolve. They had just exposed James, ripped the veil off his grand deception, and yet the feeling of victory felt hollow. Sarah's pulse pounded in her ears. Something wasn't right. She had expected to feel relief after confronting James, but instead, a heavy weight pressed on her chest, suffocating her. She looked at Emily, who was still holding the laptop, the damning evidence of James's criminal empire glaring on the screen. But it wasn't just the evidence that bothered her. It was the feeling that the worst was still to come. "What now?" Emily asked, her voice tense, her eyes searching Sarah's face for an answer. "We go public," Sarah said, her voice low but steady, the weight of their decision settling on her like a heavy cloak. "We tell everyone. We can't let him keep manipulating this neighborhood. People need to know the truth." Emily nodded, but her face was lined with concern. "But are we ready for that? James has already shown he'll stop at nothing to protect himself. He's dangerous, Sarah." The truth stung. James had always been a smooth operator, a master of manipulation. But now, it was clear, he wasn't just playing with finances. He was toying with the lives of everyone in Oakwood Heights. He had the power to tear the community apart, and Sarah was realizing just how fragile everything really was. "Look," Sarah said, her voice hardening. "If we don't act now, we'll never get another chance. We have the evidence. We have the power. It's time to expose him, to show everyone what's been going on in the shadows. Emily hesitated but then nodded, her expression grim. All right, but we need to be careful. One wrong move, and James will make sure we never see the light of day again. Sarah took a deep breath, steeling herself for what was to come. The feeling of the walls closing in only grew stronger with each passing moment. James's words still lingered in her mind, echoing like a warning shot across her bow. Was it really over, or had they just stepped into a much darker web? As Emily left to rally a few trusted neighbors, Sarah sat alone in her living room, the laptop's harsh glow illuminating her face in the otherwise dim room. The evidence, proof of the millions James had siphoned from the HOA, was there, sitting in front of her. She had the power to bring him down. She had the power to change everything. But what if exposing James wasn't the end? What if it was just the beginning of something much worse? Suddenly, there was a knock at the door, soft at first, almost tentative. Sarah's heart skipped a beat. She hadn't expected anyone else to be coming by today. Could it be James, back for a final confrontation? Or was it someone else, someone more unexpected? She stood, her breath shallow, and crept toward the door, her every sense heightened. She reached for the handle, her fingers cold as they wrapped around it. For a split second, she hesitated. Was this a trap? Would opening the door be the last mistake she ever made? The door creaked open, and standing in the doorway was none other than Mark, his face pale, his eyes wide with fear. "It's worse than we thought," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "James, he's got backup." A chill ran down Sarah's spine. Mark's words cut through the air like ice. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice tight with fear. "I've been doing some digging," Mark said, stepping inside quickly and closing the door behind him. "James didn't just operate alone. He's been working with some people on the outside. People with power. And now, they know we're onto them." Sarah's stomach twisted into a knot. She had suspected something larger was at play. But this was beyond anything she had prepared for. "Who?" she demanded, her pulse quickening. "Who is he working with?" Mark looked over his shoulder, as if checking to make sure they weren't being watched, then lowered his voice. "I'm not sure yet, but I've traced some of the payments he's made, and they go way beyond local contractors and shady business deals. There's a network, a much bigger network. People with connections, people who can make us disappear if they want to." Sarah felt a wave of nausea wash over her. She wasn't just dealing with a crooked HOA president anymore. She was up against an entire system, a network of people who could destroy her, and everyone she loved, without a second thought. Suspense visuals. The camera lingers on Sarah's face as Mark speaks, her eyes wide with disbelief, her jaw clenched in determination. The tension in the room feels almost palpable, the air thick with unspoken fear. The camera zooms in on her hands, which are trembling slightly, gripping the edge of the table. Behind her, the windows show a neighborhood that seems peaceful at first glance, but is now shadowed with an underlying danger. The ominous reflection of the neighborhood's quiet streets suddenly seems like a facade, hiding the storm just beneath the surface. Cliffhanger. The sound of footsteps outside, slow and deliberate, causes Sarah to freeze. She and Mark exchange a glance, both of them immediately on edge. The shadows lengthen as dusk settles over Oakwood Heights, and Sarah's heart pounds in her chest. Someone's watching, and they know they're getting closer. The footsteps outside continued, each one ringing louder in the silence of the room. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. The air was thick with tension as she and Mark stood frozen, listening, straining to catch every sound. The neighborhood outside had once seemed like a peaceful oasis, but now, with every creak of the floorboards and every whisper of the wind, it felt like a hunting ground, a place where no one was safe. Mark turned to Sarah, his eyes wide with fear. "What do we do?" Sarah didn't answer right away. Her mind was spinning, trying to process the danger closing in on them from all sides. She could feel the weight of the secrets they were carrying, the evidence of James's corruption, the proof of his network. And now, the knowledge that they were being hunted. The question wasn't just whether they could expose James anymore. It was whether they could survive long enough to do it. The footsteps outside stopped abruptly, followed by a heavy knock at the door. The sound was too deliberate, too controlled. Sarah's heart hammered in her chest, a primal fear rising in her throat. "Don't open it," Mark whispered urgently, stepping closer to her. But it was too late. Before Sarah could stop herself, her hand was already reaching for the door handle. She had to know who it was. She couldn't afford to be caught off guard. Slowly, the door creaked open, and there, standing in the dim light of the hallway, was a man Sarah didn't recognize. He was tall, dressed in a dark suit that looked far too formal for the neighborhood, and his eyes were cold, empty, like a predator sizing up its prey. His presence seemed to fill the space, making the room feel even smaller. "I'm looking for Sarah Bishop," the man said, his voice smooth but with an edge of danger that made Sarah's blood run cold. "I believe you've been meddling in things that don't concern you." Sarah's stomach twisted. There was no mistaking it now. This was no ordinary visitor. This man was part of the network Mark had warned her about, the shadowy figures working with James. She could see it in his eyes, the sense of power and control. He wasn't just here for answers. He was here to send a message. "Who are you?" Sarah demanded, trying to keep her voice steady, though her heart was racing in her chest. She could feel Mark's presence behind her, like a silent protector, ready to act if things went sideways. The man smiled, though it didn't reach his eyes. "I'm someone who's been sent to ensure that you and your little crusade come to an end, Sarah. James doesn't like people who interfere with his plans, and neither do we." The words hung in the air like poison, each one sinking deeper into Sarah's gut. James wasn't just the leader of the HOA scam. He had connections, powerful connections. And now those connections had found her. "Get off my property," Sarah snapped, her voice firmer than she felt. She wasn't going to show weakness. Not now. Not when she was so close to the truth. The man didn't move. He didn't even flinch. He just continued to watch her with those cold, calculating eyes, as if he were waiting for something, waiting to see how far she was willing to push. "Do you think you can just expose James and walk away?" he asked, his voice soft, almost mockingly. "There's a reason people like him don't get caught, Sarah. Because people like you are too naive to understand how far the game goes. You're playing with forces that could destroy your life with a snap of their fingers. And yet, here you are, thinking you have a chance." For a moment, Sarah was paralyzed by the weight of his words. How much did James control? How far did this network stretch? And most importantly, was she even capable of bringing it all down? But then, just as fear began to take root in her chest, she remembered something. Something that Mark had said earlier. "We have the power. We have the evidence." Sarah couldn't let herself be intimidated now. Not when they were so close to the truth. Not when everything she had fought for was on the line. "I don't care who you are," she said, her voice steady despite the rush of panic flooding her veins. "James is finished. Your network is crumbling, and I won't stop until everyone knows the truth." The man's smile faltered for a fraction of a second, but it was enough. For the first time, Sarah saw a flicker of uncertainty behind his cold exterior. "You don't understand," he said, his tone now sharper, the mask slipping. "You're already too late. James is untouchable. And now so are you." Before Sarah could respond, the man stepped back, disappearing into the darkness beyond the door. The silence in the room was deafening. "Do you think he'll come back?" Mark asked, his voice low, his eyes searching the night outside through the small crack in the door. "I don't know," Sarah replied, her mind racing. "But we can't wait to find out. If he's part of James's network, that means they're already onto us. We need to act fast. We can't afford to sit back and wait for them to make the first move." Her fingers trembled as she closed the door, locking it with a soft click. The feeling of being hunted was no longer a distant possibility. It was here, pressing in on her from every side. Suspense visuals. The camera cuts between the man at the door, his cold eyes boring into Sarah, and Sarah's tense face as she tries to hold her ground. The tension is palpable, the silence between them like a ticking clock. As the man retreats into the shadows, the camera lingers on Sarah's eyes, showing the flicker of doubt, followed quickly by determination. The door closes with a final, ominous click, and the camera zooms in on Sarah's hand, still trembling as she locks it, the weight of their next move hanging in the balance. Cliffhanger. A low, unsettling sound, like a distant car engine, reaches Sarah's ears. It's growing closer. The camera cuts to the window, showing headlights approaching from down the street. The lights illuminate the house, casting long, eerie shadows across the walls. Sarah's breath quickens. Is it just another visitor, or are they coming for her? The doorbell rings again, but this time, it's not a knock. It's a sound that makes her blood run cold. It's a warning. The real game has begun, and they're not playing by the rules anymore. The doorbell rang again. This time, it wasn't a simple chime. It was urgent. A sharp, unmistakable demand for attention. Sarah's heart pounded in her chest, every beat a frantic echo as she glanced at Mark, who was still standing by the window, his face pale with fear. The car stopped. He whispered, barely audible over the sudden rush of adrenaline surging through Sarah's veins. It's here. She didn't need to ask what he meant. The sound of the engine had been growing louder by the second, and now it had finally stopped. The headlights cast long, menacing shadows across the driveway, their harsh light slicing through the darkness like a knife. They're here. Sarah's fingers gripped the edge of the table, her knuckles white. The time for waiting was over. The game had shifted, and now they were the ones being hunted. The doorbell rang again, this time followed by a steady knock. It wasn't James at the door. She could feel it in her bones. This was someone else. Someone who had come to finish what he had started. What do we do? Mark asked again, his voice thick with uncertainty. Sarah didn't hesitate. She couldn't afford to. We fight. Her voice sounded steadier than she felt, the weight of their situation pressing in from all sides. But she couldn't back down now. Not after everything they'd uncovered, not after the threat that James's network now represented. They had come too far to let fear take control. She looked at Mark, her eyes flashing with determination. Get the evidence. The USB stick with everything we've got. We need to make sure it's safe before we do anything else. Mark nodded, rushing to grab the small device from the desk where they'd hidden it. He handed it to Sarah without a word, his expression grim. Now what? He asked, his voice quivering slightly. Now we expose them, Sarah said, her voice sharp. We don't wait for them to make the first move. We show the world what they've been doing. We show everyone what James and his people are capable of. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, the vibration harsh and insistent. Sarah pulled it out, eyes scanning the screen. It was a message from Emily. They're here too. They're trying to cover it all up. They'll do anything to stop us. Be careful. A cold shiver ran down Sarah's spine. Emily was right. This wasn't just about saving their neighborhood anymore. It was about survival. They had already drawn the line in the sand, and now the enemy was closing in. The knock at the door came again, louder this time, like an ultimatum. Sarah's hands clenched into fists, her body taut with the tension of the moment. There was no turning back. The doorbell rang once more, impatient, demanding. Sarah exchanged one final look with Mark, her mind racing with the urgency of what came next. Stay close, she said, her voice low but firm. No matter what happens, we stick together. We get this out. We fight. With that, she moved toward the door, each step measured, the weight of the moment settling over her like a cloak. When she reached the door, she stopped for a split second, gathering her breath, bracing herself for what would come next. She yanked open the door. Standing on the other side was the man from earlier, but this time he wasn't alone. There were 3 others with him, all dressed in black suits, their faces unreadable but their stances ready for confrontation. The air between them was electric, crackling with danger, each breath hanging on a knife edge. "You're making a mistake, Sarah," the lead man said, his voice calm but thick with menace. "You think you can win this fight. You're out of your league." Sarah's jaw tightened. She had no intention of backing down. "I'm not the one making mistakes," she said, her voice sharp. "James's game is over. You're finished." She took a step forward, her chest rising and falling with the weight of her words. She could feel the eyes of the men on her, the pressure of their gaze like 1,000 invisible daggers. They weren't here to negotiate. They weren't here to reason. They were here to silence her. But Sarah wasn't going down without a fight. "You have no idea what we've uncovered," she said, pulling the USB stick from her pocket. "We've got everything. The money, the connections, the proof. It's all here." One of the men's eyes flicked to the USB stick, but he said nothing. Instead, he stepped forward, blocking her path, his movements cold and deliberate. "You think that little flash drive can save you?" he asked, his tone mocking. "We've already dealt with people like you." The words hit her like a physical blow, but Sarah refused to flinch. She couldn't back down now. "Go ahead," she said, her voice steady. "Try, but I promise you, the world is going to know what you've been doing, and when it's all out in the open, there's nowhere for you to hide." The man's expression shifted, his eyes narrowing. It was a brief flicker, but it was enough. He knew the truth, and for the first time, the power had shifted. Sarah was no longer the hunted. Suspense visuals. The camera lingers on Sarah as she stands tall in front of the door, the dim light from inside casting long shadows behind her. The men in black suits are imposing, their cold stares like weapons, but Sarah's posture is unwavering. The camera cuts between her and the group, highlighting the tension in every moment, the silent battle for control between them. The camera pulls back, showing Sarah, small but resolute, standing firm against the overwhelming odds, the faint outline of the USB stick in her hand glowing faintly in the darkness. Cliffhanger. The man takes another step forward, his eyes locked on hers. "You don't know who you're dealing with," he growls. "James won't stop. No one will stop him." Sarah takes a deep breath, her voice unwavering as she steps forward into the darkness. "Then let him try." With that, the door slams shut. The neighborhood's fate is no longer in James's hands. But the question remains, who truly holds the power now? And what will be left standing when the dust finally settles?